Hi guys, and welcome back to Irony Completed. So today's the day where I'm filming my August book club video, and I'm sorry it's kind of late in the month. I'm saying that, but it's only like the 2nd of September right now, so it's not really that late, but feels late because uni's like 11 days away. Yeah. I'm just gonna have my August wrap up and my September TBR video. I'm not going to do a haul, mostly because I've already started packing a lot of the books that I ended up buying in August, because I bought a lot of books for uni and they're already starting to get packed, and some of them haven't even arrived from Amazon yet. I got a Kindle this month though. My mum bought herself the Kindle Paperwhite, so I got her old Kindle, which is great because it means that I get free classics. You know, you get like the classic books free on Kindle, which is really handy for uni. So yeah, Kindles are kind of useful. I'm excited about that. So I read quite a few books this month. I read 3 books and 3 like volumes of a comic book. So I'm going to start with the non-graphic novel books first. So I read Damned by Chuck Palahniuk, which I think I hauled in my last video, and it might have been on my August TBR list. I loved this book. I got through it really quickly. It's basically about a girl who dies from what she thinks is a marijuana overdose, and she gets sent to hell, and it's about her life in hell. Basically, she asserts really early on in the book that her idea of hell would be the Breakfast Club, like living in the Breakfast Club, and then she ends up making friends with like a jock, a geek, a bad boy, and a like really popular girl. So her life kind of ends up like the Breakfast Club but in hell, and it's all about how she learns to assert herself and to become confident in the person that she is, because she's like 13 years old, she's a little bit chubby, her parents are famous actors, and she doesn't feel quite like she fits in with the world that they wanted her to fit in to. Then there's kind of a twist at the end that was really surprising and really awesome. I did not see it coming in the slightest. I'm not going to spoil it for you guys, but it is a really awesome twist, and I think there is a sequel, or maybe even 2 sequels to this book. I'm definitely going to read the sequel at some point when I can get my hands on it, because this is absolutely awesome. It was a real interesting take on hell. He had very original ideas about hell. For instance, there was like a lake of partial birth abortions, a sea of cum, like semen. It was really like dark and twistedly funny, so if you like dark humour then you'll really love this book, and it was just a really interesting read. What? What's it? What's it? What's up? Why are you going under my bed? Stay here. Sooty! He's gonna go fight with our other cat. God damn it. The second book that I read was The Picture of Dorian Gray, and this copy is like the coolest thing in the world. It's Pulp Fiction, the Classics publishing house. I don't know what it's called. Again, I got through this pretty quickly. It's not exactly a super thick book. It's a really interesting story, and a classic tale, of course, of a man who gets a portrait painted of him, and the portrait starts to age and reflect the sins and the bad things that he's done, and he stays looking youthful and beautiful and all this kind of thing. Dorian Gray becomes a pretty bad person, but none of this reflects on him, and he stays looking like a 20-year-old youthful gorgeous person, despite the fact that he's, you know, like doing opium and committing all these really like horrible things and ruining other people's reputation. This is like one of the gayest books I've ever read. It's so gay, and it's probably because Oscar Wilde himself was a bisexual or a homosexual man, they're not really sure. I mean, like, it's just like male characters falling in love with each other, but like romance love, like friendship love. So like the painter falls in love with Dorian Gray falls in love with Sir Henry. Like, it's really gay, and I loved it. I mean, there's nothing wrong with a book being hella fucking gay. I loved it. It's a really like timeless, ageless kind of story. I think that it's kind of universal, despite the fact that it's set in the Victorian times. And it's really interesting to see this kind of like character arc and transformation of Dorian Gray from a really innocent, naive and hopeful, optimistic kind of young boy to a really hateful and not very nice person at the end of the book. So if you do like classic horror kind of books, then this is definitely one for you. I really like classic horror like Frankenstein and this and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, because they're kind of a very interesting kind of horror and very different from the horror books and films that we get today, which is why I really like them. So yeah, I would definitely recommend this to any classic horror fans. Although me and my friend India were talking about it, and we're both so annoyed that every like film adaptation of Dorian Gray, he's got brunette hair, but he's got blonde hair. He's got blonde hair in the book, and it really annoys me. They never get it right. They never get it right in the films. It's super fucking annoying. And sticking with horror, the last book that I read this month was Bret Easton Ellis's American Psycho. And I think I mentioned this briefly in my other favourites video because the movie was one of my film favourites this month. This is one of the most disgusting books I've ever read in my life. I'm not gonna lie to you. It was really difficult to read at some points just because of how grisly and gruesome and detailed some of the descriptions of Patrick Bateman's murders are, and there's a lot of sexual violence in this book. So that is kind of like trigger warning. If you're gonna read this, there's a lot of sexual violence, there's a lot of murders, there's a lot of torture, and if you're someone who's sensitive to those kinds of things, then do not read this book, because it describes it in some pretty graphic detail. This book is about the consumerism and self-obsession and image obsession of the 1980s taken to its like ultimate conclusion of a emotionless sociopathic character committing these crimes and feeling no guilt, essentially. Patrick Bateman is a serial killer, the main character, and it is written from his perspective. It's a first-person book. So it kind of falls in the vein of like Lolita. So this book kind of falls in the vein of like postmodern books with an unreliable narrator. It kind of reminds me of Lolita, where you're reading about a man who's committing sexual violence to a small child, but you don't get the moral judgment passed on him that you would if it was a third-person narrator. This book is very similar. You don't get any moral judgment passed on Patrick Bateman because he's writing the book. He's telling the story of him mutilating women and men and killing people in various disgusting ways, but he's enjoying it because he enjoys it. He's a serial killer. So you don't get the same moral judgment you would with a third-person narrator. In fact, it's almost glorified, and it's a very interesting concept. And I also really love Lolita, the book Lolita, because of the same reasons, because of the unreliable narrator. This is a very dark book, I'm not gonna lie. There were some passages that I had to skim read because there are some very, very graphic descriptions of eyeballs being burnt out of people's skulls, sexual violence, electrocutions, axe murders, shootings, very gory descriptions. And it was at sometimes very difficult to read. At first, I was reading this in bed because I often read at nighttime before I go to sleep, and then I had to stop reading it at nighttime and only read it during the day. Not because I'd have nightmares per se, but because my dreams were becoming really fucking strange and I wasn't enjoying them. They weren't necessarily nightmares, but they were like really disturbed and twisted dreams, so I had to stop reading this at night, I'm not gonna lie. But I got through it. I didn't think I was gonna make it, but I got through this book. And if you don't mind gore and violence and you like a postmodern kind of writing style, then this is definitely an interesting book. It's a very interesting social commentary, and if you do like books like Lolita or even books by Chuck Palahniuk, this is kind of in the same vein, and I would recommend it if that's the kind of thing that you enjoy. But please do bear in mind that it's very graphic, very gory, and uncomfortable to read at most moments. It was interesting though because I was reading it, and for the first kind of like maybe half or like third of the book, there's no gory descriptions at all. You find out kind of in passing that he's committing these murders, and he mentions like, oh, I have her head in the freezer and I have a body in a acid like vat or whatever, but you don't get descriptions. And then the further into the book you get, the more he's losing control of his bloodlust essentially, and then you get more descriptions and there's more and more and more, and it just keeps like picking up in pace and increasing the amount of people that he's killing towards the end of the book. And it really does reflect his mental state, which is excellent. It's very well written in that respect, but there are some pretty gross moments, so beware. And then I read the first 3 volumes of Scott Pilgrim versus the World. So that's Scott Pilgrim versus the World. Wait, the first 2 are called Scott Pilgrim versus the World. Yeah. The first one's called Scott Pilgrim versus the World. The second one's called Scott Pilgrim versus the World. And the third one is called And the Infinite Sadness. Scott Pilgrim and the Infinite Sadness. And this one, I'm gonna like brag for a minute. This one is signed by Brian Lee O'Malley, who wrote the Scott Pilgrim series and illustrated it as well. And I am obsessed with comic books. My dad has been reading me comic books since I was a child, so for as long as I can remember, I've been in love with comic books and graphic novels, and I also really like manga, and this is kind of in that style. The author Brian Lee O'Malley is a Korean-Canadian man, so it is kind of inspired by a lot of Asian art, but it's still Americanized or westernized or whatever. I am obsessed with these books. I read them years and years and years ago, and I was reading one a night basically for the past few nights, and I'm definitely going to get through the rest of the series before I go to uni because I can read them really quickly. They're a really cool comic book series. It's like part superhero, part video game inspired, lots of like cool Mortal Kombat style battles, lots of video game references, and it's just a really cool and interesting series. If you've seen the movie, then I definitely say read the comic books because they go into so much more detail, and there's so much more like small moments that are just like cooler, and the relationship between Scott Pilgrim, the main character, and Ramona Flowers, the girl that he's literally fighting for, is so much more in depth. If you don't know what Scott Pilgrim is, basically this guy, Scott Pilgrim, is a 23-year-old living in Toronto, and he starts to fall for this girl called Ramona Flowers, which is like the coolest name ever and totally the reason that I dye my hair loads of bright colours. Anyway, he totally falls for like Ramona Flowers, and he finds out that in order to date her, he has to fight the League of Evil Ex-Boyfriends, and she has 7 evil ex-boyfriends that he has to defeat in order to date her. And each volume kind of explores like 1 or 2 of the evil exes. There's 6 volumes and there's 7 boyfriends, so, well, exes I should say. It's just a really cool, funny series. It's like a comedy, but it's also like an action, and it's just really interesting. And one of my favourite comic book series, definitely one of my favourite comic book series. I really need to buy Seconds by Brian Lee O'Malley and read that because I still haven't read it, and I really ought to. But yeah, I would definitely recommend it to any comic book fan or just people who like the movie if you weren't aware that it was based on comic books. What's wrong with you? The comics are awesome. Don't judge me for liking comic books, by the way. Like, I really don't give a shit, this whole like elitism about comics versus graphic novels and all that. It's like a whole other video. I can make a whole entire rant on that, but I love comic books. I'm gonna make a video about my favourite comic books at some point in the future. Like I said, no haul this month simply because everything is everywhere and my room is half packed and blah 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 blah. I'm moving to uni in like 2 weeks, okay? Give me a break. But in terms of my September TBR list, my to be read list or pile, I want to finish the Scott Pilgrim series. So there's Scott Pilgrim Gets It Together, Scott Pilgrim versus the Universe, and finally Scott Pilgrim's Finest Hour. I think this one's signed as well. Yeah, this one's signed too. I thought it was the 3rd and the 6th one. The 3rd and the 6th book are signed by Brian Lee O'Malley. I met him like 2 or 3 years ago at a signing at a comic book shop in Nottingham, and he was really nice. I loved him. He was so cool. So yeah, I'm definitely gonna finish the Scott Pilgrim series because, like I said, I can easily read them like in a few hours, and I just want to reread them all before I head off to uni, so yes. And then the other 2 things in my TBR pile are both things that I'm gonna have to start reading for university in the first few weeks of uni, so I thought I could get a head start before I go. The first thing I have to read is some Edgar Allan Poe stuff. Yeah, we have to read The Mask of the Red Death, and this is like an anthology of all of his stories and poems, but it's got some really cool illustrations, as you can see, so that's why I bought this really cool copy. I got this from a secondhand bookshop in London like forever ago for £10, which seems like a lot of money, and it probably is a lot of money, but it's just such a cool copy. I'm gonna take this to uni with me, and I'm gonna get started on The Mask of the Red Death, yes, which is a short story, by the way. And the other thing that I'm gonna have to start reading this month is Nathaniel Hawthorne, The Scarlet Letter. This is The Scarlet Letter in Selected Tales, so it's an anthology of some of the things that he's written, but I just have to read The Scarlet Letter, so I'm gonna get a head start and read that. But yeah, I'm kind of excited to read it because they talk about it in the movie Easy A. Don't judge me. They talk about it in Easy A, and it sounds actually really interesting, and I've never even seen any movies about it, but I'm super interested in the story because I know it's about like the girl who has an affair with the minister, and it's about like sex and virginity and purity and all that kind of thing, which are topics that really interest me. So yeah, I'm excited to actually read this. I'm not excited for everything, but I'm excited for this. And for Edgar Allan Poe, because I'm kind of in love with him. I know he's dead, but yeah. So that is everything for my... Wait, a bird just... what? So that is everything for my August wrap up and my September TBR. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you want to let me know what books you read in August, then please leave them down in the comments, and also let me know what things you are excited to read in September as well. Just leave those down in the comments too. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to, then please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. If you want to follow me on Twitter, Tumblr or Instagram, they'll all be linked down in the description, along with everything that I'm wearing and what's on my face. I'm loving my makeup today, just a side note. This red smoky eye is like, yes. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!